All right.
I can see your recording.
You're live, John.
All right, thank you. Good morning, everyone. We're just going to give another minute here for folks to join the meeting. All right, well, it's a couple minutes past the hour. Let's go ahead and get started. Good morning. Thank you all for joining us. This is a meeting to discuss a proposal for streamlined reporting using a census-date CBM OOS. We'll take a quick look at our agenda before we start. We're going to start with an update on the Data Modernization Initiative and stakeholder feedback. From there, we'll dive right into the draft proposal for the census-date S. And we'll have a lot of time for discussion. Folks who have questions, want to make comments to the group, you're invited to do so. A little bit of housekeeping. Victor Reyna will be monitoring the chat. So if you have a question and you are welcome to interrupt, please just send Vic a chat and he will let me know, and then you can go ahead and unmute yourself and make your comment, ask a question. So participation is definitely welcome, but with the number of folks on the call, if you could please just get in touch with Vic first so we can keep things organized. After that, we'll have a recap of key points and discuss the survey, and then discuss next steps at the end of the webinar. So the Data Modernization Initiative, this has been undertaken at the coordinating board with gusto. It's a big project with a vision for equipping internal and external stakeholders with actionable insight and data for decision-making purposes. And some of the goals are to develop and implement modern, flexible data architecture to deliver user-centered value through dynamic access and with robust governance and security on the back end. This should include high priority reports and or dashboards that use our current data and evolve our current processes and websites to support these new offerings. So the approach began with a detailed design. We'll continue with a proof of concept before the implementation phase, which is expected to be 1.5 to 2 years long. We are right now at the cusp of beginning the proof of concept, and a large piece of this for us is the migration to the cloud. So we look forward to seeing how that works in the proof of concept. The staff at the agency has received a lot of assistance in this, and we're looking at adopting new tools and new processes for managing our data pipeline. We've had assistance in this process. There are several work streams related to the Data Modernization Initiative, one being stakeholder engagement and data architecture. We have received help from consulting firm Alvarez and Marsal. For the website assessment and updates, we're receiving assistance from Minerva Consulting. And finally, on the data governance and website governance, both the assessment and implementation of new data governance processes internally, we've received a lot of help from Dr. Nancy Smith. Part of the stakeholder feedback we had a number of themes came up. Those themes include requests for more timely data. Also, we heard from stakeholders a desire for more clear definitions throughout the data system. Easier access to all submitted data, Our IT group has worked hard to migrate reports out of the old Move It system and into the new EDC portal. That's helped a little bit getting access to your immediately submitted files. You can now get an Excel spreadsheet. But there's a long way to go on this. And it's not just your CBM reports, but also the data products downstream from those reports. We heard desire for better user interface and user experience. This is kind of a no-brainer. We have a lot of room for improvement there. And finally, better alignment of data collection and reporting. So some of the project actions for the Data Modernization Initiative aimed at these identified needs regarding access to more timely data. We want to shorten the timeline from data certification to publication. For example, when you submit your 009, we may have all the information we need to tell you your graduation rates from the same institution. But our current process is to wait till we have all the information together for all the institutions for a sector and then move forward to publishing. So we're looking at ways to shorten that timeline and make these data points available as they could be made available to the institutions and other interested parties. Also improve the ad hoc reporting capability and analysis. For improved definitions, we're looking at developing and publishing an agency-wide data dictionary. And this also includes a lot of aspects of data governance and data management processes internally as part of that. And also implementing a content lifecycle management process, which will help retire older reports and look at making sure we are updating things in a timely fashion. Accessibility to data, we're looking at improving the self-service dynamic reporting capability. On the website front, implementing a consistent web page hierarchy. As many of you know, that there are quite a few URLs associated with the coordinating board, quite a few domains. Consolidating those domains into a sensible structure is part of the work that is being undertaken with Minerva Consulting. And just a basic philosophy to share data sets wherever possible. Moving on to user-friendly design, we want to upgrade the navigation and search capability on our websites and create intuitive visualizations. And in there, easy access to the data you're looking for. And finally, the alignment, we again improve the self-serving dynamic reporting capability, but also make sure we're eliminating duplicate data collections. The proposal before us today, I believe, will address that, or could address that if we choose to move forward. And finally, publishing disaggregated and granular data wherever possible. So these are some of the main actions we're looking at based on the user feedback that should be incorporated as part of the Data Modernization Initiative. So the implementation roadmap, this is going through this coming August. We're not going to go through the whole slide, but accomplished to date, we've been thinking about this in terms of three major streams of work: the technology and data architecture stream, the governance stream, and the communications piece. For the accomplishments with technology and data architecture, we've come up with a concrete solution design. This was with help from Alvarez and Marsal and a lot of agency input, as well as input from the field. In data governance, we've consolidated the stakeholder input and come up with some assessments and recommendations. And regarding the communications, design templates have been developed and approved internally, as well as an initial sitemap for the main website design. And this work is going to be ongoing through the summer and beyond. But this is a brief overview of where we stand on that implementation. So into the nuts and bolts, into the details of the proposal before us today, this webinar is to discuss the census-date CBM OOS as a potential way to improve CBM reporting. This came initially from the Negotiated Rulemaking Committee that met in December 2017. This is the 5-year data review committee. I believe it's a statutorily mandated Negotiated Rulemaking Committee to look at data collections that could be retired. And a recommendation from that committee was that the coordinating board form a working group to investigate the feasibility of eliminating the 1 and 4 and initiate a beginning of semester OOS. And the work group should also consider consolidating the OE1 and the end of semester S report. So based on that recommendation, we formed a work group in July of 2018. And at that meeting, the recommendation was to pursue the idea. So keep the idea alive. The members in attendance believed it was worth pursuing. And we discussed how we would proceed. One of the decisions that was made was to limit the 001 to demographic data. So the thought was, well, we could eliminate the 1 and the 4 and just get everything on the S. And they said, no, the idea was to go more towards sort of relational database principles. And those repeated fields, such as a student's gender, ethnicity, date of birth, major, those could be reported once on the 1 instead of being appended to every single record on the S. So from that, the recommendation was to eliminate the 4 and scale back the 001 to just demographic data. The 004 also includes faculty level data. This is both for the CTCs and universities. And at that meeting, we discussed the need to preserve these faculty level fields, particularly for the universities. These are used for formula funding, and these are those fields on the 004, like responsibility factor, tenure track, those sorts of things. Those are also collected, these faculty fields on the 004 for the CTCs. We did an internal review and did not see any reason we had to have these fields at census date. Since we already get them at the end of semester 008 report, those fields could be entirely eliminated for the 2-year institutions. Between that July meeting and the October meeting, we received quite a bit of feedback from the participants at the July meeting and folks in the field who took time to look through the draft materials and the proposal. And in that interim period, we received quite a bit of feedback. Institutional reporting officials, IR directors pointed out elements of the proposal that we hadn't considered and made suggestions that were incorporated into the proposal at that October meeting that made it, I think, a much more solid proposal and much more robust. So we're grateful to the active participation of everyone leading up to that. And then finally, we met in July of 2019 to review the final proposal. Very few changes, or perhaps no changes were made at that meeting, but it was unanimously recommended by the 19 institutional representatives in attendance. So this is sort of the background of how we got here and where the proposal came from. And we can move right into sort of a brief overview of it. So for universities, the current 001 and E1 would be replaced with the C1 and the E1 to facilitate, make sure we're all clear about what we're talking about. Instead of calling it the census S, we're going to call it the CS. And similar with the 001, we would call that the C1 and to denote census, and the E1. So those would be reduced, and the reduction would be all those SCH summaries, state funded, not funded, developmental, high school semester credit hours, all those fields, the contact hour fields, would be removed from the 001 reports. So those would be slimmed down considerably. Of course, the S would now be, there would be a beginning of semester S and an end of semester S. And structurally, these are almost identical. And the 004 would be completely eliminated for universities and be replaced by a census date 8. Now, this is not the same end of semester 008 because we're not going to ask for all the data on the end of term 8, just those faculty level fields that are on the current CBM 004 and nothing more than that. And for the CTCs, same story with the 001 and the OOS, but the those faculty fields, as I mentioned before, those could be completely eliminated, and it wouldn't affect any current reporting by the coordinating board, and primarily because they're not needed for formula funding. So the memo inviting everyone to this webinar included some attachments. We're going to look at those, just a brief description of those attachments. The draft record layouts, these are the item numbers, the field descriptions from from what would be the final reports. It's called draft record layout. Of course, it doesn't include the fixed width file positions, but those are details that we would be sharing, of course, as soon as possible if a determination is made to move forward with this proposal. But these Word documents show sort of what, under this proposal, the reports would look like. Item numbers in these reports match to current item numbers. So for example, the S is pretty much sequential because there's very little changes to the S. But you'll notice on the 001, the item numbers skip considerably because of all those fields that would be going away. These item numbers are temporary. They're just to facilitate comparison of the future reports to the current reports. These item numbers could be made sequential on the 001 in the final draft. On our end, we don't store data or follow data by item number, but rather by the content of the data element. So I think from our perspective, renumbering those items would be pretty easy and something we would do. If on your end, renumbering item numbers causes considerable problems, that's something we would like to hear about. The other documents you received were these Excel spreadsheets, Excel workbooks. These are the proposed draft changes. And what these do is go element by element through all our current reports and identify how that data element would be preserved or whether it could be eliminated and where it would be preserved under this proposal. The idea behind it was to continue to collect all the data elements we're currently collecting, with the exception of those faculty fields for the two-year institutions, and just make sure that we weren't missing anything as we consider this change to reporting. So the edit reports, we've been thinking about what would need to change in the edit reports under this proposal. And one of the big items that came up was the need for a summary table in the edit report for the census-date S to give you the total semester credit hours, contact hours, by fund code, by level where applicable. And these would be based on the current summary reports that you receive on the 004, which I know a lot of institutions rely on. Once that they get that edit report, that gets saved as part of their certified data. So we would need to make sure that was in the edit reports moving forward. And also we would need additional edit checks. And this is just one. When we were thinking about, okay, if we had a census data S, if we funded off the census data S, we're gonna need to look at it probably closer than we're looking at it right now. One aspect of this is making sure that the OOS is unique on a sensible key. And so we were thinking through, well, what is a sensible key? And that would be in a given semester, a given student should be in one course, one section, one time. So for that, we had, semester, report year, and then the course identifiers, the course subject, course number, course section, and the student ID. And of course, there are instances where a student may take a summer course that was a flex course that flexed into the fall report, and maybe they had to retake that course in the fall. So we could see the student appearing in the fall report on 2 records in the same course. So we would need to get flex entry in that sort of key to make sure that we were unique, but allowing for 2 records with different flex entry field. And finally, instruction type, because some courses come in with the same course subject number section, and there's the lecture and there's the lab. So we looked at this and we said, okay, how would recent OOS submissions stand up if we tried to enforce a key like this? And we found a number of examples where there were what appear to be duplicate records. We reached out to a handful of schools that we saw with those, and the majority of them said, "Oh, indeed, this was a duplicate record, or this was misreported and should have been reported differently." Although we had a couple of schools point out that was how they intended to report. Looking very closely at the instruction type field, there is option Q for, I believe, competency-based courses. We had one two-year institution point out, well, our lecture and lab, if the student passed both of those with competency, we would report both with the Q. So that would make that, non-unique, two duplicate records. And that institution, they did some internal review, and they came up with a way to move forward, making sure those would be able to be uniquely reported to us. So much appreciation for your work on that. And then we had one four-year institution look at this and say that they would need to implement it would take a good bit of work on their end, and with the legislative session, probably wouldn't be ready for the spring. So this would potentially be rolled out for the summer end of term reports, which aren't due for another 7 or 8 months. And if we do go toward enforcing this key, we'll definitely notify all the institutions in advance. So let me pause there and invite any questions. Again, please send your questions to Victor Reyna, and he will.
Okay, John. The first question is, would the edit reports for the OCS and the OOS be the same?
So the end of term S will have grades. That is the only sort of conceptual difference in my mind between these two reports. So I believe they would, for the most part, be the same.
And a comment, we use 8-week terms, so the student may legitimately take a class twice in the same fall semester, for example. The flex entry key would not address this.
And do they have the same section numbers? Are they not different on section numbers? How does that work with your reporting on the 004 now? That would be my question to that. Because if they had different section numbers, they took the first 8-week section, the second 8-week section, that should not be an issue. But it would be an issue if you repeated section numbers within a semester. And you, of course, you're welcome to unmute. You can just let Vic know you have a question, and you are welcome to unmute and ask as well.
And that came from Stacy. So Stacy, if you would like to maybe add more to your question, because I'm not sure we're fully understanding the question.
Well, and I'm not positive because I don't do the state reporting myself anymore. If the section numbers are duplicated, we've just started reporting in the last year, our fall 1 and fall 2 on the same report. For example, the fall 2 had been pushed as flex entry to the next semester. So I just wanted to make sure that now that we're reporting those in the same term, that would just not cause an issue. I know other schools are doing 8-week terms as well, community colleges, and that's something to think about for all of us to make sure that the section number is not repeated, so it does stay as a unique record. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And Aaron, could you tell me how you report? Because TAMU Corpus Christi is basically saying the same thing. With we do not repeat section numbers. So if you don't repeat section numbers, that should not be an issue.
Yes, that's correct. And I was also thinking we have started to flex our second 8 weeks. So that should be going from fall to spring and then from spring to summer. So that should not be an issue for us as I was thinking through it.
Okay. And then we were also asked on duplicate records, is there a way for us to be told about them prior to certification? And the answer to that would be certainly we can make sure that that's added to the edit report, and so you would be notified as it's happening. We should currently be doing that anyway. John, the next question we got, and I'll let you answer, is, so just to be clear, faculty salaries won't be reported until the end of term on the 8th, correct?
That's correct. The census date 8 is just to collect those fields that are currently on the 004. Because as we go to the S, we can't easily add those fields. I mean, if you had for every course just one faculty member, yes, we could add those faculty fields to the S, but of course many courses are taught by multiple faculty members, maybe with 50% responsibility factor, 50% responsibility factor. So for that sort of many to one relationship of faculty to course, for that reason, it made more sense to separate those faculty records out into their own census date 008. But yeah, to your question, no more fields than those currently collected on the 4th. And
the next question is, what is the anticipated start date for the updated new report? I think we may wait. There's a slide coming up later, and I think that might be better to address, John, unless you want to address it now at the end of the presentation after we hear all the comments.
This is a great time actually to address that.
Okay.
So this, our recommendation is to start this for fall of this year, fall 2021. Reason for that is it's the beginning of an academic year. Having the break happen at the beginning of an academic year will facilitate our data runs and data analysis considerably for researchers who use this data. Having a complete fiscal year of the data in one format, I mean, the break's going to be hard, right? If this proposal is implemented, they'll have CBM 001s and 004s back through time, and then in the future, it'll be the 00S. So they'll have to translate over time in some regards, but having that translation happen between fiscal years instead of in the middle of a fiscal year is desirable. Why this coming fall? It's because it's not part of the base year for formula funding. Fall 2021 won't be part of the base year. There's only 2 semesters each biennium that aren't part of formula funding in any regard, and that's this coming summer and then this coming fall. The advantage is that this coming fall, if the data is delayed, we're not bumping up against any formula funding deadlines. If the data comes in a little bit messy, if there are growing pains related to the change to the implementation, the good news is this data is not, for the fall, will not be part of the base period for formula funding. So it just gives us a little more time for problems to be identified and worked out before we're using the S for formula funding. So that is the thinking behind the timeline.
All right, Connie, why don't you go ahead and unmute yourself, and because you have a question on both the number of fields on the OE1 and the 1, and also the duplicate record check on the S. So if you want to unmute and ask your question, we'll be happy to.
I actually have 3 things. First, I'm going to, since John just talked about the proposed start date, I don't know about other schools, but we're dying under TSI 2.0 and all the changes associated with that. And if you don't give us more time than you gave us for that, then you ain't getting it very, very prettily for fall of 2021. I don't know what the timeline is for getting all this approved within your own agency, but at the very least, I think that the school's ERPs are going to need to know about this like March at the latest, because this is not small. This is huge for us. And so flowing into the other questions is on the reduced number of fields, does this affect the OE1 as well as the 1? Are the S's going to be exactly the same, except for 1 will have obviously grades and because it's at the end of the term, and then the census one wouldn't? That's the second question. And then the very last thing on the edit checks, you need to add dates. That will solve some of your problems on schools who have English 1301-001 in both of their 8-week sessions. And if you check that date, that makes it unique.
Thank you, Connie. Those are excellent points. I'll start with the first one. In regards to the timeline, we need to have our plan is to have a decision by the 3rd week of February. Yeah, following this meeting, there will be a survey sent out. We have that survey drafted. We have a data committee that's gonna take a look at it, but it will be a very short survey, perhaps a 1-question survey. So yeah, 3rd week of March, our 3rd week of February is our go, no go goal. Your second question, Connie, remind me what that was. Was it the start dates?
The
number of records.
Number of records between the E1 and the 1 and the S and the CS.
So you were asking if the edit checks were going to be, if the reports were going to be the same. So yes, those reports I believe are going to be the same. Of course, the S will have grades at the end of term. It won't have grades at the beginning of term. The only other element that comes to mind is the flex flag. There's some different flex options on the end of term S related to the span courses. So the flex field will have a little bit of difference between the census date and end of term. Other than that, the reports should be almost entirely identical.
And Connie, just so you're aware, no decisions have been made, but we have spoken to Banner and to Colleague. And of course, you know, anytime there's a change, there's concerns. But neither Banner or Colleague at this point seems to think this is not doable. But I'd be interested in what other people have to say. And part of the reason I'm saying that is because many institutions, but all institutions, I'm not naive. I know all institutions don't use the same ERPs, and so that makes a difference. But what I have heard from many institutions is for them, they don't think this is going to be as large a task as what was initially thought, because they say they actually developed the file for the 1 by creating a census date S currently. That they build their 1 from the S, so they run their S first at census date to create the 1 and the 4 to help with the balancing issues. And so for them, that made this seem more doable once they thought about that process. But I would be interested in hearing from other institutions who don't use those particular ERPs and see if that's an issue, that if that's going to help or hinder them if they go through the same process. Okay, John, I'm going to read this one because this one's a long comment. It's a comment from someone. For those of us who utilize the existing 004 and 008 to build out our institutional data warehouses, has there been any consideration or investigation into unintended consequences for institutions who use these data structures beyond just CHCCB reporting? Concerned a bit about the workload that may be required by our IT and IR teams to make these changes. Did these issues come up in committee?
So I don't know that these were discussed at length in committee. What we've heard is that from the providers that nothing in this proposal is to say that your data systems will stop their ability to produce the 004 reports, right? But of course, what you'll be sending to the coordinating board will be the CBM OOS and not the 004. So if your internal processes are built to reflect what's sent to the coordinating board, and they continue to be built off of the 004, to the extent that doesn't agree with your census date S report, that may introduce problems. But of course, we have very little visibility on our end into how those reports inform, you know, the processes on the institution's end. And to your question, I don't recall that being addressed in depth by the working group.
And Lorena, I see your question about student classification within the same term, but I'm not sure I exactly understand the question. Would you like to unmute yourself, Lorena, and ask the question?
Yes, Victor. Hi, everyone. Good morning. The concern is this is something that we currently have because especially like when we have students that graduated that are still in high school and they take classes with us in the winter semester, in the May semester, for example, in a special calendar, their classification is a first-time freshman. Then in the summer they take another class, and then the classification is different. Or what about in the fall or in the spring? We have a student that the classification, if they take 2 classes, the classification on the number of hours might differ within the same term. And right now, since the OOS compiles any census date from beginning to end, then it is not only, I think there's other fields that will be impacted in the transition on how to classify the student information. I don't know if I explained myself.
I'm not sure that I fully understood the question. So this was for a high school student that they graduated high school and then became a first-time in college student?
Yes, and this is a sample, but it could be like a student could be a first-time freshman at the beginning of the semester. And then it happens to be that if they enroll for the second 8-week courses, then they are not going to be, like if we were to report this ones in the summer, then they are not first-time freshmen anymore. They are like a continuing student. So how the reporter is going to identify the classification of the student within the same semester?
So the census date S, right, would have the classification of the student at census date, right? And if they completed the first 8-week courses and then began their second 8-week courses, which you would not report to us on a census report until the following semester. And if those second 8-week courses, they had finished their first 8 weeks and now they were a sophomore or whatever, then yes, at the next census report, you would give us that new classification.
When you said at the next census report, it will be then with the e-report or with
the following semester. The following semester, your census date reports would have the new classification for that student.
Because the OOS report has all of the courses that we have regardless of the census date.
Right. So,
and we are a banner school. So the way that we code the students within the same term, we have our part of terms or flexibles. The program right now, it is set up that automatically those courses are going to be pushed for the next coming term.
Mm-hmm. So the classification, I believe, will be reported on the 1, not the S, because it's one of those repeated fields that there's no need to have it on every record. So it would be on the 1. So your census date 1 would have the student's classification at census date. And then if with their second 8-week courses, they became or with all of those courses, they proceeded to the next level, then on the next semester's 001, they would have the new classification. I don't think anything in this proposal would fundamentally change how you identify a student's classification because you already report that on the 1 and the E1. So conceptually, that would remain the same.
Okay, and the second question that I have is currently we have the 2 servers, the Move It and then the EDC portal.
Right.
So the issue that we currently have is that when we submit the E1 and the 001 on the EDC portal, the data, you read it first. So then when we send the other reports through the other server, depending on the timing, we get not imbalanced data.
Yeah.
So since the OOS is in the old server, or well, on the Move It server, how this is going to be resolved?
That's a great question. So those imbalance issues you saw on the E1, those were related to growing pains. The RIT group has been migrating reports out of the old Move It system and into the EDC portal. The EDC portal works much faster, data reports are much more readable, you have better access to your data, but there were some lessons learned. One of those was that these balancing issues, RIT group maybe didn't understand them entirely, but we worked through a lot of those problems with the E1, and I believe that those balancing issues should be addressed moving forward. To your question about where the S will be, it is being migrated to the EDC portal. We are working with the IT group now, independently of the decision that's made here, to migrate the OOS to the EDC portal. It's the report that takes the longest to run. It slows down everything and Move It for you. So regardless of how we proceed with this report, the OOS will be migrated to the portal.
Thank you, John.
Welcome.
Okay, and the next question is, I'm trying to understand the census-date and the end of term 8. Is the census-date just for instructional faculty teaching a course? We are reporting on the S.
Yes. Then that's just for universities.
And a comment. It's a long one, so just let me read it. Schools are concerned about the timing of the implementation. Banner schools must work with TCC to implement these changes. I'm not sure 7 months is going to be long enough. Also, many schools have numerous internal reports built off of the underlying CBM, using them as data marts, especially for those that do not have a data warehouse. And they will be forced to rebuild much of their internal reporting structure. Finally, given the current state of things, pandemic, loss of funding, reduction of force, TSI, OOT, et cetera, it is going to be very taxing for schools to meet this deadline. It might be better to start testing the changes in the fall with a final run in 2022.
Thank you for those comments, and I think you're right. There's going to be big challenges to this, and we can't paper over them, nor should we. A concern for testing these is that if we're going to say, well, how about you just submit a census date S, but we're not going to really use it. We're going to still go off your 4. It's kind of like saying do all the work, but not have any of the savings in effort by not having to produce a 4. So that seems like that seems difficult for that reason. We could push this back. The one concern is that if we did this in fall of 2022, that would be during a base period of formula funding. So there's really no room for you to submit your fall report and maybe it gets through our edit checks. Maybe we said, this looks like a reasonable report to us, and then we start running reports off it, and you notice, wait, this data is wrong, and you need to update elements on your end, update processes. Maybe we tighten edit checks to help you identify those issues before you certify your reports. Having the opportunity to work through that in a first semester that's not for formula funding, I think would be to everyone's benefit.
Oh, and a great question that we're getting. One thing I'd like everybody to know is we try to be as open as we can and to speak with the ERP systems as often as we can, and we often invite them to invite us to meetings if they have concerns about what's coming up in the future, what's coming down. So the question is TCC here? And the answer is yes. Both Cindy and Dennis are on this call. Cindy, would you like to make any comments on behalf of TCC or Banner?
Yes, thanks, Victor. And both of y'all, great job on this meeting. When we were told about this, we thought we can probably address it. My area of concern is that if we're not going to know for basically another 3.5 weeks or so, basically a month, that is going to make it a real challenge. So if any of this goes through, my thought is it just needs to happen as quick as possible. But we are, someone early on mentioned the challenges with the TSIA too, and we are definitely experiencing that as well. So I would second that that's a concern on our side.
Okay, and I don't know if Brett is on the call. Brett, for colleague, are you on the call? And if so, would you like to make comments?
I am on the call. I have some concerns. I need to be able to look at the specs and all that, you know, the draft specs to fully know. In some ways it makes our life easier, but in other ways there's going to be some challenges with how we have to redo our reports. And because of the fact that we're going to need to keep our older reports still there for a while, we're going to have to create some brand new processes and such. So it's a little bit daunting. I mean, I like the idea of it not happening until 2022, just because of the TSI changes and also because of COVID and how everything's been a bit in flux this year. But, you know, we'll do our best.
And thank you both for being on the call. I really appreciate you joining us. And this reminds me of a conversation we had about the complete record layout. You mentioned the specs. From our point of view, preserving the record layout wherever possible, like on the 001, we have items going away. That doesn't mean that we need to scrunch down the fixed width file to make it smaller. We can just leave those spaces in the fixed width file where those semester credit hour data was populated, so that your information systems can continue populating those spaces with semester credit hour data. On our end, we would simply ignore them. So those would become unused fields. And if they were spaces, they'd be ignored. If your system continued to populate them with information, even though we weren't asking for the information, we would simply ignore it. So that is our thought moving forward, which would hopefully facilitate the transition from a technical standpoint.
And Lamar from Genzabar, would you like to make some comments?
Well, I think this has been a long time coming. The CBM 1 and 4, we had to jump through hoops to create sections that really didn't exist just because they reached their maximum limit, and it just seemed odd to have to do that extra programming. These changes are going to make things just more streamlined and easy. For Genzabar PX side, we'll be able to make those changes as quickly as you send them out. So we don't have any issues with that.
Okay. And this might be a good time. Julie Eklund is also on the call. Julie, would you like to make any comments at this point?
No, I really very much appreciate everyone's feedback. You know, we've had a lot of conversations about this and realized it was time to bring it to everyone and make some decisions about a plan for moving forward. I think everyone in general feels like there's a lot of possibilities here. It's just talking through some of the timing and some of the details, and some of the devils is in the details. I think I've sent a couple of messages. The one thing that did come up, and I wanted to make sure that was clear, is that when we talk about the S at the beginning of the semester and end of semester, we're talking about the elements, that there's consistency in the elements. I do realize we have some populations that are reported on end of semester reports that don't come in on beginning of semester. And I believe that's something that the team has looked at, and we'll just have to make sure that we will have a smooth transition for those populations. Thanks, Vic.
Thank you. All right, and John, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Hi, sorry, this is Cindy again. I was just wondering, would it be possible to consider doing this in the fall 2 years from now to be in the same position, or is that too far out?
that could certainly be considered. I mean, if this fall is not doable, and we're really, that's what we're here today to determine, you know, if we're ready to go for it for this fall. If this fall is not feasible, could we go next fall in the middle of a funding cycle? Yes, we could. Should we wait for 2 years to begin this in a not funding cycle? Yes, we could. Whether we should, I don't know, but your feedback following this meeting will help us make that determination.
All right, John, I'm gonna read a comment from, I'm gonna read 2 comments that are from the same person. So let me finish the first one because the second one is actually related to the second one. So no admin unit code field in proposed CB8. So the question is, does CB not need the admin unit code? Flex entry is now being entered in a new field called displaced. Flex entry is now being entered in a new field called displaced students. Why are they called displaced students, and rationale for the change? Given effort post-certification as well as effort to have reports ready for this fall, would prefer to hold these changes off for at least a year, especially with all the issues our IT has had to manage with the COVID. And the follow-up question to that was, why will CB8 need to be submitted twice, both at census and in the semester?
All right, so there's quite a bit in there. It sounded like a suggestion to hold off. Thank you for that. That is feedback that we are looking for. You mentioned no administrative unit code. Is that currently collected on the 004 and we are not going to collect that in the proposal?
It's currently collected on the 8 and the 3.
Right. So we will continue
it's not
to
in
get,
the 4.
we will continue to get your end of semester 8. So currently we get those administrative unit codes at the end of term, right? Under this proposal, we would continue to get that at the end of term. There's nothing about the end of semester 8 is changing. That's not on the proposal because it's not on the 4, and we don't need it at census-date.
But we do need it on our end because we use that 8 for a lot of our surveys and such. And so having the 8 and to know on the beginning is important for us.
That's very interesting. Of course, your student information system can have that. There just won't be a place on the fixed width file for you to report that to us on the census date 8, which is just those fields from the 004. So whereas the census date 1 end of semester 1 are pretty much identical, the S will be identical. The 8, what's the same about them is they're both faculty data, but for universities, the census date 8 is just a replacement of that faculty data on the 4 and not a complete replacement of the end of term 8.
All right, I'm gonna ask a question, then I'm gonna ask Julie to comment. If you will, Julie.
I'm sorry, Vic. If I can interrupt, you also asked Susan about the displaced students. I want to make sure I got that. So following Hurricane Katrina, there was an option in the flex field, option 7 for displaced students. Feedback we got in the work groups was, well, since we're re-looking at this, maybe you should separate out displaced students from the flex field, because if there is another natural disaster and we have to report displaced students and you put it in the flex field, you know, under necessity for convenience, let's think through this now. So you'll notice that is at the end of the report. So if we don't have a natural disaster and you're not receiving displaced students as happened during Hurricane Katrina, that last position in the fixed width file can be left off, and I'm sure will be left off unless we have a natural disaster. So that was the thinking behind that.
Okay. This is not directly related to this topic, but the question was asked. That's why I'm going to ask Julie if she wants to comment on this, because this is a general comment about 8-week courses. Marina's issues won't be introduced by the new reporting approach. It's a current issue. If a student starts as a first time in college in fall, second 8 weeks, and then becomes a continuing for spring, we have no way to report them accurately on the 001 for student type currently.
So you don't set the first time in college flag. Is that what you're saying? There's no first time in college flag set.
Well, that's why I kind of wanted Julie, well, just so that this is something we need to be aware of, okay? Because the way we use first time in college is if somebody graduates from high school and they attend that institution in the summer or the following fall on census date, they're marked for first time in college. And that's a big deal because we use first time in college or first time undergraduates quite a bit in our reports. And if I understand the question correctly, and I do, well, since the second 8 weeks is not in census, if a student graduates from high school and then they start the following fall, but they start in the second 8 weeks, you are correct. That is an issue because we will not catch them as first time in college.
Wait a minute.
Because they will be reported flex in the spring.
Wait a minute.
Victor, oh, sorry.
I'm sorry, this
Can
is
I take that
Lorena.
wrong, Julie?
It is the same, it is coming, I believe, from my institution because that's a concern and an issue that we have been seeing. And now that everything is going to be together, it is going to be more obvious because we don't know how to identify within the same term.
So,
right. These are good points. I don't want to get off track too much in terms of the point of the webinar. It's something we're aware of, and I think there's some information I could provide in terms of reporting for 8-week courses related to adjusting for that, or some things we could consider. So I think I understand the concerns and the issue that's been raised, and maybe if we have time at the end, John, we could get back to this, but I do feel like it's important to stay focused. And yes, it's something we're aware of, and I'm happy to share information about that if we have time, or to talk with you off, anyone who's interested offline. So thanks. It is a good question.
Thank you.
John?
Yeah.
You're welcome.
And it's a question that exists independently of this proposal. I mean, currently your second 8-week students, if they're first time in college and don't show up in the first 8 weeks, they will get reported. We'll see them in the spring as they come in on the flex reports. And how we calculate graduation rates, we currently take first time in college from the fall. So whether those graduation rates also included FTIC students that we only saw in the spring flex records, that's something that's currently not done, but there's nothing in our data system that would prohibit us from considering a change, which perhaps could address that concern. But really I don't think anything in this proposal affects that either way.
Okay. Actually, a good question coming up too, because it is related. It's more related to the data modernization and the earlier comments in the presentation. When would the data in the accountability system reflect the new reports, or would we not see a difference?
Well, we're collecting the same elements at the same time in a different format. So in that regard, I don't see it necessarily impacting the accountability. Of course, the data modernization, we're hoping to improve the turnaround time, but this proposal itself is not going to change when data is available for accountability. Does that answer the question?
So that means that you all are set up to already create the accountability data off of these new reports as soon as we send them in?
Oh no, we have a lot of work to do. Our analysis system is set up to see data as it comes in currently. So all of our reports that involve the CBM 001 and include semester credit hours, all that stuff, we'll have to change. and it's going to be a very big lift on our end because there are innumerable processes. We could do a complete inventory of everything we're going to need to change, and I'm sure we're going to miss a bunch of stuff. So, so we have a lot of appreciation for difficulties on your end that we aren't aware of, because when we think of the difficulties on our end related to implementing this change, they are considerable. But hopefully the benefits will outweigh those growing pains related to implementing this change to reporting. So it's a difficult decision, and it's sort of the goal of this webinar is to help us determine whether to move forward or not.
And a comment from Connie, and something we've actually discussed quite a bit. So why wait until fall 2022? Why not maybe start in spring 2022?
It would be in the middle of a funding cycle. So there would not be any opportunity to say, oh, we got the data wrong this time, but we'll get it right next time when it matters, because spring 2022 matters, right, for funding.
And Connie, not to say that it couldn't be done. I mean, anything is possible, right? I mean, we can make anything work given the time. One of my concerns about that had always been, but it's not a huge concern, is when we create our data sets, we create them for an academic year. And if we were to start in a non-fall semester, that just means the data for an entire academic year would not look the same. Now,
Okay.
Is that a big deal or not? It's something that has to be considered and thought through.
Okay, I was just thinking that it might give us a head start on, we always assume with changes that we are going to have some dirty data in the first submissions. And then by the time we get to fall, we should have the majority of those kinds of issues worked out, both on your side and ours. I do understand about not wanting to do it during a funding year, but I also have some concerns about waiting 2 years to actually do it. So that's just me.
Yeah. No, I appreciate the feedback. Okay, long comment. Will we get feedback on the initial OOT? I am concerned with having not only these changes, but also reporting another iteration of the OOT. The OOT has been very time-consuming endeavor that requires input from advisors. Everything being due October 15 is going to be tight, not to mention all of the end of semester reporting. We likely will be one of the institutions to still run the 001, 004 as they stand, so our internal processes still work. I don't see us being able to transition everything to the new reports as we are in the middle of an ERP migration to the cloud. Thank you for those comments. That's good to keep in mind. And we are going to keep all these comments so we can review them later too.
And regarding the OOT, I don't have any information for you on that. There are no changes being contemplated for the OOT. However, we are receiving feedback from the field. I expect to be receiving more feedback shortly, and based on that, if changes are necessary, those will likely be contemplated for a future report. But as of now, there's no changes identified.
Okay. And then I've received several comments, and so we'll keep a note of them, that many institutions do not use either Banner, colleague, or Genzabar, who've been on this call, and that the work would have to all be done in-house.
Well, thank you.
And another comment, I think we cannot delete below the 2 items from the CBM OC1. I'm trying to, items 13 and 14. Yeah, we would not delete semester and year.
Is this for the university 001?
I can't tell.
Yeah, no, I don't think you would delete semester and year either. Oh, I see. It says eliminate if merged to the OOS. You're right. I will make an adjustment. This is on the university materials. Yeah, those fields are not getting, the one is not getting completely merged to the S. It's getting kept as a standalone report. And yes, it will need semester and year. Thank you for pointing that out.
And then something that we're definitely going to have to keep in mind, because we're getting a lot of comments about the 008. Just a suggestion, might be easier for schools to submit a full 008 at the beginning and end of term, and THECB can pick up the pieces they need for beginning 008. This would cut down on the number of programming changes to create a new DOT 008.
That's interesting. So I don't think we want to formally ask for all the fields in the end of the term 8 in the CBM manuals and say, these are the fields that you must submit to us if we have determined we don't strictly need them. That said, if it makes sense from a technical standpoint to preserve the record layout at the end of term 8 so that the fixed width file is sent to us in the exact same structure as the 8, and if it makes sense for your institution to populate that fixed width file the same way you would at the end of term, but we only grab those elements that we're actually using, we only edit those elements that we're actually using, I don't know that it makes much of a difference to us. And that might address your concerns for not having to program two completely separate, fixed width outputs. So that's an interesting comment, and something we should think about.
Okay, and I guess something we just need to clarify, because the question is, will the 001 and OOS enrollment hours going to be compared?
The 001 won't have those enrollment, we're not going to have those SCH fields. Those will be on the S. So we won't be getting, SCH totals on the 1 and then the breakout on the S. We'll just be getting those sort of constant fields like student's major and residency on the 1.
Another comment for us, to make sure we at least admit we heard the comment. Would the THECB consider phasing out other reporting requirements, 18 characteristics of DOC programs, to free up some resources for our teams to make these changes? We cannot see a statutory reason to keep this reporting going.
What reporting was that, Vic, again?
I'm not sure. 18 characteristics of DOC programs?
Doctoral programs.
Oh, doctoral, I'm sorry. I only had 1 cup of coffee today.
So I'm not sure that this is data we collect through the CBM process. Is this part of your program approval?
No, it's for data we're required to put together every year on our doctoral programs. There's like 18 different items for each one of the doctoral programs. Maybe even 20, depending.
And what's the report that you submit those on?
I think we're required to have it posted on our website somewhere, as opposed to necessarily submitting it to you all.
I see.
And I think you all have a link to our websites of where those are posted.
Gotcha. I'm guessing this is something that another division in the institution would have more information on, since it's not part of the reporting that we receive. It's not something that Vic and I can speak to, but just the general comment of eliminating data that's not strictly necessary, that's definitely something that we're interested in. The 5-year data review process is, you know, a formal mechanism for surfacing those suggestions for eliminating or reducing reporting. But I think Vic and I couldn't speak to the 18 characteristics of doctoral programs that you're required to post on your website.
Okay, this reminds me that we probably need to just emphasize a couple things. What is the reasoning to keep an 001 with demographic data only? Can the demographic data also be included on the new OCS to eliminate the 001 altogether?
Absolutely. The demographic data could be appended to the S. At the very first work group meeting, this was a question that came up. I mean, this was a question that was posed to the work group. Would we want to have just an S report that was really wide, you know, and a student's demographic information would be repeated on each record for every course that student was enrolled in? So you would get that student's name and their date of birth and their gender and their race, ethnicity over and over and over on each record for all, you know, 4 or 5 classes or whatever they were enrolled in. And the recommendation was made was that really doesn't make a lot of sense, that we should go toward, I think the term was relational database principles, and get that information one time that we could get just one time. So could you get it on the S? Absolutely. But the recommendation from the work group was rather clear in that regard, that separating that out made the most sense.
Okay. And then just a comment, and I think you've addressed this, John, but you know, just because we received this again, submitting the same reports at the beginning and end of term would save a good deal of technical resource, and THECB simply not grab the data it does not need. We would not have to create a new report.
And this is for the census date 8, I imagine?
I'm assuming it's for all the above.
Yeah. So for the 1 and the S, absolutely. The same report. And as we mentioned, we want to make this as easy for the institutions as possible. And if that means the census date OC8, where we only need a few fields, if it makes sense to submit the exact same record layout as the end of term 8, and if your information populates a few of those fields that we're not asking for, we could just simply ignore those and grab the elements that we are requiring and edit those elements and disregard the rest. That is possible, and probably something we will look to do to facilitate the transition.
Just some quick housekeeping. I was asked if we're going to post a recording of this meeting somewhere. I assume we are, but I'm going to let John verify. We're
recording this meeting. We have friends from the College Readiness and Success area who've done a lot of webinars, and they've helped us tremendously with putting this one together. And I will lean on their expertise for getting it uploaded to the agency YouTube.
And just so the group knows that people are commenting, I have received another comment. I'd prefer keeping the demographic information on the CB1 and not having the duplication by student and course. So just a comment from someone. I think we've addressed all the comments. A lot of them were duplication. So I'll let you proceed as you would like, John.
Yeah, we did have a comment from the field. This was before the webinar. Someone who wasn't going to be able to join us, but she did ask that we address this. Often the devil's in the details, and some of the most thorny issues are for a very small minority of records. But those are the problems that we really need to think about. One of them is the interinstitutional classes. Currently on the 004, we only want to see enrollments that are being reported for funding. So if you know, 2 institutions have an institutional agreement and the students studying over here and the sending school is sending them over. Whichever school is going to report them for funding would report them on the 4th, and that would be based on whatever agreement they've reached. Of course, both schools can't report the student. However, those can be reported on the 001. My suspicion is that the interest was in having those students show up for their fall head count. But of course, the SCH would be in sort of the unfunded, identified as unfunded in the 001 if that was the case. The OOS instructions for inter-institutional reporting are not clear. This was pointed out to us in the last week or two. We looked at the manual, and indeed, they're very right. The instructions aren't clear. In fact, they're contradictory. So we need to update that regardless of how we proceed with this proposal. That's something I wanted to point out. So under this proposal, how are interinstitutional courses handled? Under the proposal, those enrollments would be reported or could be reported on both the census date and end of term S, and they would be noted as unfunded. There's a field on the S that says reason this course is not funded. In the materials, you'll see an option was added to say interinstitutional course reported for funding by the other institution. So that's how you would be allowed to continue reporting these interinstitutional enrollments. For example, if you had a student enrolled at your institution, but they were only taking coursework at the other college or university, you would be able to continue having them show up in your fall head count under this proposal. Of course, if the student is studying elsewhere, you're going to need to report course information on the OOS, the prefix, number, section, zip code. On the 004, where you have to report these, if you're reporting that a student for funding who's studying elsewhere, because that's how your agreement's set up, that option is contemplated in the instructions to the 004. That option is contemplated, but it says that you need to have those courses from the other institution's inventory on your course inventory on the 003. The current end of term S instructions don't require this. Anecdotally, I believe some schools have just been filling in course prefix number, section, zip, maybe not from the other school's inventory, but using perhaps a placeholder course or something to get the record through. It's not ideal, but moving forward, I think our philosophy is to not ask for any more than we need to move from our current reporting to this future reporting. So if you have a lot of interinstitutional coursework, a lot of students that fall into these sorts of categories would be interested in your feedback. If you report interinstitutional students on the S that receive instruction at the other institution, would you have that prefix number and section? Now, of course, if you report them for funding, you already would for the instructions to the 004. But it's just something to note that for those interinstitutional courses, some of those course identifiers may not be entirely reliable under this reporting unless we were to enforce that you have all those courses on both inventories. And that's not part of the proposal. But if we wanted that information to be absolutely accurate, it may have to be. But that's not what's been proposed. So again, we're interested in feedback from you. If there's a preference for only the institution reporting the enrollment for funding to report those on the S, of course, that might cause concerns for schools who have students that are only taking courses at another institution in the fall and might have their head count reduced by a handful of individuals. So I wanted to surface that issue for any schools that might be thinking through that.
All right, one more question, John. This is from a university. We have item 27, student affected by the undergraduate funding limit on the census day 1. Why do we need a new item affected by funding limit in the census date F? This item is related to student, not course.
So the census date S has the student affected by the funding limit. And that's to replace item 13 on the forward. Thank you for pointing that out. That is something that we should look carefully at, and I don't have an answer for you, because in the draft materials that it does not say eliminated from the 001. So if we get that there, why would we need it on the S? That's a great question, and definitely something I will take away from here.
And someone has just asked that you recap the advantages of the proposed changes.
All right. Recap the advantages. Just make a note for myself. So the advantages is you currently report summaries of contact hours and semester credit hours summarized by student. And then you report summaries of semester credit hours, contact hours summarized by course. And then we make sure these match. They don't have to perfectly match, but within a certain range, they need to be relatively close. We don't have good information on census date. We can't even help you debug that mismatch. So we see schools have difficulty getting their census date reports balanced and certified because of this issue of one summarizing by students, another summarizing by courses, and they don't match. This more granular report gets all the information we need on one report and eliminates that mismatch issue. And I think for those institutions that use their CBM reports as source material to inform other systems and processes, having that granular information should be helpful instead of disagreeing summary tables by student or by course. That's the primary advantage as I see it. If there are other advantages that folks would like to point out, please chime in.
And just to reiterate, because I'm seeing several comments. Several comments of this would be a lot of work for their institutions, and they are hoping that we are keeping that in mind. And I would just like to reiterate, and I'm sure John will reiterate, that was the whole purpose of this, is trying to figure out how much work it would be, what the stress level would be, and because we are fully aware, unrelated to this webinar, just in regular CBM reporting this year, I have heard from multiple institutions that they are having a difficult time getting data in because of the COVID situation, with either loss of staff because there was just a reduction in force, or loss of staff because of illness, and lots of other reasons. And I just want to reiterate, yes, we are hearing that. We are keeping that in mind, and I assure you, we are letting our leadership know, and our leadership is also fully aware of that. And I will let John then add his comments to that, in general, to that.
Yeah, no, we appreciate the difficulties involved. Like I mentioned, on our end, there's going to be many processes that need to change, processes foreseen and unforeseen, no doubt about it. Again, the advantage to reporting this fall is that if we're delayed, there's no preliminary funding run due to the LBB on November 1st. You know, if difficulties come up, we have more flexibility, and you know, we fully appreciate the difficulties involved, and that the first collection is not going to be as clean or as tidy as third or fourth collection. So yeah, comments are well received.
Okay, I think we've addressed the comments, John.
Okay. Well, if we have no more comments and feedback, I don't want to hold everyone up until noon.
Well, I have a question. This is Darla English at Midwestern State, and I don't know if I'm not submitting them correctly in the chat. I'm having a hard time wrapping my brain around whether it's a good decision to remove from the census date S that a student is affected by funding or not. And this is why. A lot of hands are in the data from the admission side to the registrar side to the reporting side. And so if you miscode a student as affected by funding and their level happens to be graduate student or second bachelor's, and it's showing that all of these are excessive hours, that would be a filterable, like you within the same report, you could filter, do I have anybody classified as a 5 that's showing they are all in the excessive hours column? Do I have anybody classified as a second bachelor's that's all in the excessive hours column? And if excessive hours and three-peats are going to be on the S now, wouldn't we want to be able to compare and contrast as data validation that no coding of an application caused a student? I know it's going to make it wide and it's going to make every line have the data, but I'm just wondering if that would help us filter, because that's one of the hardest things when I'm trying to clean up the 1 and 4 is making sure nobody miscoded a person affected by funding.
Any other comments about that? I would love to hear others.
I agree with Darla. This is Lorena.
I also agree.
Okay. Making a note, keep that on the OOS, which, I mean, to that original comment may mean that we should be eliminating it from the 001 if we're going to be getting it on the S. I mean, it is a.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. We will look at that and consider removing that from the 001 requirements if we're going to get it on each course record on the S.
I guess another comment regarding doctoral funding code now on the CBM 001 is based on student major /SIP. It will be moved to the CBM 00S matched to the CBM 003. This will make it based on course in future. Is this correct?
So the doctoral funding code will be on the S. What item number do you see that on the S? Whoever asked that, if you could go ahead and unmute and help walk me through that question, please.
It's me, Tracy Stegmeyer. Yeah, where I see it is on the 001. It says doctoral funding code numeric, eliminate OOS, match to CBM 003. And the way we do it now is we take the doctoral funding code from the major, because so we'll have say a kinesiology student, but they'll take a math class, and we don't want math as their doctoral funding code. We want kinesiology as their doctoral funding code.
Because it's their major, right?
So that's going to kind of mess that up. So we were just wondering how that's going to work.
So doctoral funding code is not, it's a student specific code. It's not tied to the course. So
So if it's moved to the OOS, I don't see anywhere on the OOS that there's a SIP number or whatever attached to that specific major, the student major.
No, the SIP code on the S is related to the course, not the major. So that does make more sense.
To make it so base it on the course instead of the student. Okay.
Right.
Okay, that does make sense.
That does make sense. Okay. But I see that you're looking at where it says eliminate this on the 001, item 19 for universities. That should probably be preserved if it is a student-specific code related to their major and not the funding code of the course. So thank you for that.
a comment that I hadn't thought of, but it does make sense that with the COVID vaccine becoming more available, or as it becomes more available, that a lot of staff may go on vacation. And it may be hard to get a hold of staff.
Not only at your institution.
Okay, this is Darla. I have another question. So if one report collects the zip code of the major and another report collects the zip code of the course, some of the errors I receive say your restricted program admission code does not match the zip code of the major, because maybe they just recently changed their major and we haven't taken that restricted course admission. What would we still be submitting?
So
if we have one piece of that data on one report and one piece on another, won't that cause problems?
So we have the major of the student, right? Which we describe as a zip code. So for RPA code, if they're a nursing student and you're declaring this student is entering this restricted nursing program, which I believe we collect that for the NSRP stuff, then we would expect that student's declared major to also be, you know, a nursing zip code.
Right, but you have to get admitted to the nursing program. So you could have declared nursing and not yet met the criteria, but then if you get bumped out of nursing, like let's say you didn't progress appropriately, somebody changed the major, but there's another form that collects the data in the Banner system that you're in a restricted program. Again, if they're on two separate reports.
So the major and the RPA code should both be on the one, right? Moving forward.
Okay.
So it's
I was just making sure they weren't going to be split onto separate. I'm sorry.
No, they shouldn't be.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Anything else? Anyone else not getting their comments through the chat, go ahead and unmute yourself and chime in.
I have one question. This is not specifically my question. It's for somebody else who couldn't come to the meeting today. So I don't know if I'm asking it correctly. They want to know about seniors who are taking grad hours and how that's going to affect the undergraduate limits, because we don't want those grad hours counted into their undergraduate limits. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I would get on the phone with Doug Parker to help me with that question. Vic, do you know the answer to that?
Well, nothing should change.
Right. Nothing under this proposal is going to address that in any way.
Should change that. Doug is on the call. Doug wants to answer. Doug is our authority on that subject. Are you there, Doug? Okay, I guess he may have dropped off, but nothing should change.
Nothing should change. It sounds like a very specific question, and if you want to shoot us an email, we'll be helpful. Happy to help you with that.
Okay, thanks.
John, this is Lorena. The documents that you refer at the beginning of this session, you said a Word and an Excel, were those sent to everyone?
Yeah, those were part of the memo that invited you to the webinar. They were at the very bottom as attachments to that. You'll find them there. So both the university and to your...
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So some housekeeping, John. They're asking if the slides are going to be shared, and I assume they can be placed on the same webpage as the recording once that's announced.
They will be on the recording. I'm happy to share the slide deck. If anyone would like a copy of it, please shoot me an email and I will send you the slide deck. The slides will show up on the recording as well, but if you want the PowerPoint, please reach out. I'm happy to share.
Hello, this is Salma from UT San Antonio. I have a quick question. We talked about reducing CBM 5 building room report.
You did. You brought that forward, and I appreciate it. And I'm glad you brought it up. So would you like to describe the change, the proposed change?
I mean, I don't see anything in this meeting. You did not talk about it. So I'm just asking, do we still have the plan to reduce CBM 5?
So let me just lay that out. So in the proposals in the work group, we added the CBM 005 as part of this change. This is for universities only, I believe. The CBM 005 has enrollment fields on the one, has enrollment fields. The 005 has enrollment fields for the universities and for the two-year institutions, because I believe some of them have to report the 005. For the four-year institutions, those enrollment fields on the 5 are the same enrollment fields on the 4. Enrollments of this type, enrollments of the other type, and the number of students. So we consulted with the folks in our funding group who use the 005 for their facilities calculations. And what they're interested is just the number of students, number of students in these courses. They don't care how they're broken up by which category of enrollment. So the proposal Selma brought forward was that we trim down the 005 to just have one enrollment field. Because if these different breakouts are going away on the 4, why do we need to break them out on the 5? And the answer from our point of view, after doing sort of an internal review and asking the folks who use the 5, if it matters to them, we got back word that it does not, that just one field saying number of enrollments is sufficient. So to your question, why wasn't this included? Thank you for bringing it up. We thought that for this meeting, it would be nice to sort of narrow our focus and not get too many reports involved, but it's an excellent point. If this proposal goes forward and we no longer have the 004 with those enrollment fields, does it make sense that the 005 have these breakouts? The answer is those breakouts are not necessary from our point of view, and consolidating them down to just one field would make sense for us. Whether we want to add that change to everything else that's changing is somewhat of an open question. We thought that it would facilitate the decision if we just have one fewer report on this proposal, but thank you for bringing it up because it is very pertinent to the discussion.
Hello, John, can you hear me?
Yep.
Hey, this is Dan Hubbard from UNT. I appreciate the fact that the proposal includes reducing redundancy and things like teaching load credit, which is on the 008. Also, right now it's reported on 004. So this may be beyond the scope of today's discussion, but what exactly is TLC used for?
It is used.
Because my concern has been that it sometimes we see changes throughout the semester based on, changing teaching arrangements or what have you. But I just wonder how, given the lack of consistency between institutions, how that's exactly used.
Oh yeah, the reporting, how teaching load credit is reported varies dramatically from institution to institution. I can't remember exactly where it's used, but what I do remember is that it's analyzed based on the presumption that within institution it's consistently reported for their different faculty.
Okay. Yeah.
So yes, it's not looked at as comparing school to school. It's within school comparing faculty to faculty.
Okay.
But I cannot recall what report it's used for, but I'm happy to look into that if you could just shoot me an email.
Okay, will do. Thank you for that. Also, just
John,
wanted to go ahead. Sorry.
this is Julie. I just want to say, I think it might be used for the expenditure study, if Emily's on, in terms of determining faculty costs that get looked at across courses. But someone else could confirm that.
That's what I was going to say. This is Susan. I just finished ours, and it's used in the expenditure study at least.
Thank you.
Okay. And then I just wanted to reiterate something that was mentioned earlier in the slides about the need for better data definitions. We really need full lineage in terms of how each variable is used on the CBM reports, and that's definitely lacking now. So at UNT, we certainly support any efforts to better define and give us the details about how these fields are calculated and used in state reports.
And when you say how they're used, do you mean like when we report graduation rates or persistence, those sorts of?
Yeah, how exactly things are calculated, and it would be nice if we had maybe a list of all the CBM fields and what reports they're used in.
Okay, well, we will make note of that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, I have one more question. And again, this is for somebody else. So you mentioned, and I almost forgot, since you mentioned all those enrollment fields in the 004 are going to be eliminated, it looks like those fields are connected to the expenditure study. Is that going to affect the expenditure study? Is it going to have to be revamped or something like that?
So we will still get that enrollment information. Instead of asking you to summarize, you know, all the different students by this category, by that category, by the other category for a given course, we will see that at the granular level in the OOS. So that data will still be used in a similar fashion and still be available to us. Of course, we're going to have to change our programs, you know, fundamentally to point to the new data structure, but the data should be preserved.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions or comments?
Great job. We appreciate all the answers.
Okay, thank you. So if there aren't any more questions, just think about next steps. You should be getting a survey on February 4th, the latest February 5th, but hopefully the 4th. I expect it to be very, very short. It may say, do you support this proposal? And the options could be, yes, I support it. No, the timeline's too short, or no, I don't support it, period. We will have a comments box. So please feel free to add any comments, including comments you surfaced today. If you'd like to reiterate them, please do. We will be gathering those and categorizing them. And again, a final determination will be made around February 23rd, and we will communicate that with all of you. And I want to thank you all for your participation in the meeting today. Thank you, Vic, for running the fielding all the questions. Yuji Kim, thank you for taking notes, and our friends at CRS for helping us put this meeting together. And if there are no further questions with that, we can wrap it up.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye.
everyone.
Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.